that it was transmitted in a way that caused us to know that it's secure, it's exactly the way God intended it to be. We talked also about some other aspects of the Bible, and now tonight we go into the study of God. And in particular, God is. How do we know that God exists? And once more, I would say it's possible that everybody in this class has already dealt with this idea. You've already come across it. You've already had to deal with it, and so you know how you feel about it. You know what you think. The thing is that our young people are being exposed in this area as well to the idea that there is no God, that you cannot prove that there is a God. And so tonight I want to talk about some reasons that I believe that there is a God, and I believe these would be reasons that you could share with your young people, with children, other people's children. If they love you and appreciate you, they'll listen to you as well, maybe better than they listen to mom and dad sometimes. But at any rate, we want to be able to share those things. So we're going to begin with the idea that creation proves there is a God. In Psalm chapter 19, the opening verse, the singer says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork." In other words, there is a designer. Okay, let's see, you got Psalm 19. Tim, can you see if we got an extra sheet that they'll be able to follow along? Thank you. Okay, so design indicates there was a designer. We understand that. We may literally ask sometimes, man, I wonder who the designer was for that house. Boy, that is so pretty. I like that. That's got beautiful elements to it. We would never say, well, I wonder what tornado brought that house in here. We wouldn't do that. We understand that doesn't happen that way. And neither does it happen with creation. Bert Thompson, now deceased, and Wayne Jackson, also deceased, wrote a study course in Christian Evidences. On page 25, they recorded this, which is really quoted from R. Platt, in an article that was in Reader's Digest way back in October of '62. Here's what they said, or he said, "Did you realize, for example, that the human body is composed of multiplied trillions of cells? In the nucleus of each cell, hundreds of thousands of genes are present. Each gene consists of a complex chemical called deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. DNA has a complicated code for mapping out of the entire development of the individual. If the coded instructions of a single human cell were put into English, they would fill a 1,000-volume encyclopedia." Well, I wonder if they'd say even more than that now, because they now have mapped the human genome, which was a major project for them to do. But I'm confident of this, that this depicts it as it is. That when you have a little baby, even from the very outset, when the egg is first fertilized, within that fertilized cell, which begins to rapidly divide and multiply, but within that very first cell, if you knew how to do it, you find what color will its hair be, what color will its eyes be, will it have big hands or little hands, and on we could go. It's all there, all in that. That does not sound like something that just happened by chance to me. And so we have what's called the design argument. Now, if you need to know what this is called in the scientific realm, It's called the teleological argument. That's one of those words that, my parents spent a lot of money for me to learn, but I like design better, understand it better. It's easier for me to grab hold of than the other. Okay, now let's start looking at various aspects of the human body and see what we're talking about. First, turn with me, if you will, to Psalm 139. Psalm 139, this is a psalm of David, and he's singing about his wondrous God, the God that we serve. And as he does so, in Psalm 139, particularly in verse 14, he makes this statement: I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. All right, let's talk about the fearful making of the design of the human body. We'll talk about the brain, for example. The brain is able to distinguish as many as 10,000 smells. That's almost beyond my imagination. And yet, have you ever walked into your house and said, "Ooh, what's rotten in here? What died?" or whatever. Have you ever done that? I have done that. I suspect some of you have as well. I have on occasion told my mother-in-law I thought they ought to make a law that food can't smell till you eat it. Because my mouth starts watering with the first scent of her cooking, or Teresa's cooking for that matter. It just starts, and it's not ready then. It's just getting started, really at that point. Well, the mind is able to do that. It is not the never control. Sorry, I'll talk to my typist tomorrow morning when I start on the next night. And for those that don't know, I'm my own typist. So I'll talk to my typist and straighten this out. It's not the never control center. It's the nerve control center. It's just getting the V in the wrong place there. The nerve control center of the body is the brain. So what did God do because of that? Well, he protected it with 3 layers. You've got the scalp, the skull, and the membrane, all protecting the brain from damage or from injury. God understood its importance, and he protected it because of that. What about the human heart? Some of you all have had difficulties with your heart. What you need to know about it is it beats 72 times per minute. Now, that's on average. There'll be some people a little lower, some a little bit higher, but it shouldn't be too much higher, and it shouldn't be too much lower, because you're going to get in trouble if it is. But if it beats at that rate, it beats more than 100,000 times per day, 36.5 million times per year. It pumps 2,000 gallons of blood per day, coursing through about 60,000 miles of blood vessels and carrying 438 cubic feet of air through the lungs. And then that blood that goes through the lungs carries oxygen to the cells through the rest of the body. And from those same cells, it gets the carbon dioxide and it hauls that out. Now that's the function of the heart combined with the lungs working together in the human body. And again, I just simply would say that doesn't sound like it just happened. I don't believe it could just happen. And it's important for us to see that. What about the human eye? If you want to do an interesting study, not as much on the human eye as on the eye of a housefly. There's a fellow by the name of Behe, a professor, who, by the way, he's more of a deist. He's not sure he believes in the God of the Bible, but he definitely believes in some superhuman, supernatural power. And Behe writes a book called Darwin's Black Box. By now, it's in the academic world, if you were quoting it, they'd say, "We need something more recent," because it It was written toward the end of the 1900s or right in the beginning of the 2000s. But in Darwin's Black Box, he goes into, in one chapter, the eye of a housefly. And he shows how that couldn't have developed over time. Have you ever tried to kill a housefly? Why can you not do that with just your hand? A few people can, but most of us cannot. Most of us miss every time. Swat our leg, we swat our head, whatever it is, and we hurt, but the fly doesn't hurt. The fly keeps going. How does that happen? Well, it's the design of the eye. Now, if that eye did not have the multifaceted way that it's able to see, then how's it going to develop it? Because all of them have been squished. Before it could develop, they'd have been squished, wouldn't they? They'd been crushed. So, very important to realize that. What about the human eye? Well, the human eye can handle 1.5 million simultaneous messages. I don't want to put you on the spot, but Chris, on a computer screen, do you have any idea how many pixels there are on a screen? Huh? So a lot. Okay. And that's just a TV screen. Now, what we have to realize is that what that TV screen is doing, or the computer's doing with the screen, is it's taking color and it's breaking it into all these little bitty dots that they call pixels. Well, the human eye does all that by itself. It's got all that figured out. And it processes all of that, in an instant, really. And therefore, it recognizes things as it needs to. The retina contains 130 million receptor cells shaped like rods for black and white vision. And then it also contains 7 million receptor cells shaped like cones that are for color vision, distinguishing between 1 million different shades of color. One of the most fascinating things to me about being married to someone that understands artwork, you got to remember, I draw a stick figure and then tell you that it's a man, okay? So I'm not an artist at all, but Teresa is. And one of the interesting things is to look at something she's working on and watch as she analyzes with her eyes the color and sees, well, that color's not quite right. And she'll just adjust it just a shade. Maybe a little hint of white goes into it that you blend in or whatever. It's got to be blended in to get the color just so in that thing. How do you do that? Well, God made the human eye that way. And I don't care what iPhone or Android you've got. And I don't care how good the camera is on it. It does not match the human eye. I have been many places like you all have and taken pictures. And when I look at them, I think, I wish it could have captured what I saw. Because it just can't do that. They get closer now than they used to. But they still don't get there, do they? They don't make it. The human eye does. It is a perfectly formed camera that automatically adjusts to light and distance. So tonight, is probably not a good daytime. If you came into this building in the daytime and it's very bright, we're saying about noontime, come in here at noon, very bright outside. No matter how light it may be in this building, when you first come in, you know how your eyes have to kind of adjust just a little bit. It's just like they're whited out, because they're they're blacked out, because they're too narrow. And when you come in, they've got to open a little bit so you can pick up that light that's in here. Well, it does that automatically. You don't have to stop and think, let me see, do I want my eyes to get wider or more narrow? We don't have to think about that. God's already got that programmed in. The entire process of vision and perception is completed, now listen to this, in 2 thousandths of a second. You might say, I don't know about that. You ever watch a guy play baseball who hits a ball that is pitched at 100 miles an hour? That's moving right along. How does he do that? Well, he does it because the human eye is designed. Now he does other things too, and I'm well aware of those. I can't do them anymore if I ever could, but I understand, a little bit about it. So that's the eye. What about the ear, the liver, the taste, and pain? All those things prove that there is a God. Let's start with the ear. Did you know that your ear has 24,000 hair cells that react to sound and convert it to nerve impulses for the brain to decipher? Or some of you are saying, yeah, I keep pulling those things out of my ear. I'm tired of them growing up. But that's not what we're talking about. It's down on the inside. They vibrate as the sound comes in, and they take that vibration and translate, goes to the brain so that you hear sound. And I hear sound. And it's deciphered by us. And again, think about it. You could have 20 children playing this auditorium, and sometimes it seems like we do, and I'm not complaining. I would complain if we didn't have children, not if we do have them. So don't take that wrong. But if you got 20 children playing in here and one of them gets hurt, I guarantee you their mother knows the sound of that child's voice in a heartbeat. And you might say, well, what's the difference? See, you and me, there may not be any difference. But they differentiate that sound. They can hear it. They're the mother of that child. They know that sound. What about the liver? The liver manufactures more than 1,000 types of enzymes to control chemical reactions in the body. This is one reason doctors worry about the liver. It plays such a vital function in the body. And yet most of our medicines, whether we realize it or not, are processed by the liver. That's where they go. And if we get too much of certain things, you have bad things occur to your liver. It's not unusual for a doctor that's serving a patient, well, let's say with, for example, MS, like Teresa has. They're going to regularly check her liver. They want to know how that medicine is impacting that liver. Why? Well, because the liver plays such a vital part, as you could see by that short comment that is there. What about this? There are 3,000 receptors for taste. I think some people's don't function very well. I'm going to give you an example, and some of you are going to say, yeah, I know you're the one that's messed up, talking about me, not. But for example, I've talked to people that say beets taste like dirt. Well, they don't taste like dirt to me. They taste very good. I like beets, So, well, how's that go on? Well, 3,000 receptors. Some folks like Cajun cooking. I like Cajun cooking very well. It's fine for me. Teresa, on the other hand, one taste and that's it. We're done. Too hot. For her. She also doesn't like my Mexican food at the temperature I like it at. I'm talking about spicy, okay? I'm not talking about heat. She likes more heat than I do. I like more spice. But at any rate, we get all that in the mouth. Can you imagine? 3,000 receptors. What about this? 4 million pain receptors. And now some of us are raising our hands and say, I'd like to reduce the number. I'd like to bring that down a little. I'm a little bit tired of the pain. Just to be honest. Okay, let's talk about this a minute. There was a fellow who, in days gone by, went to India to work with those who are lepers. And I don't know what you know about leprosy, but leprosy takes away feeling from an individual, and that leads to some of their problems. Now, he worked with those lepers in India for years and years, and every morning he had a devotional with them, and he would talk about how that God was aware of you all that have this disease. He knows your difficulties, and he loves you and cares for you. And then one day while he was getting ready to go to the morning devotional to start the day, he spilled hot tea on his foot and did not feel it. And that day, he got up and said, it's wonderful how God cares for all of us who have this disease. People that don't feel pain, their children don't feel pain, you know what they end up doing sometimes? They cook themselves in hot bathtub water because they don't know how hot it is. They literally, burn their own skin because they can't feel. Pain is important. Pain's what makes us draw back, right? If you touch a hot eye to the stove, how long does it take you to get your hand back? Well, it doesn't take me very long. I can tell you that. It's quick. Pain's important. Pain lets you know where the problem is. When your child is screaming that they're hurting, what's your first question? Well, where does it hurt? Where do you feel it? Of course, Teresa and I years ago got to see the Harlem Globetrotters play. I don't know if Metal Arc Lemon was still playing in those days. And one of their gigs, that it's all made up, was that those guys, he'd be hurt, and they'd come over to help him. They'd be rubbing on his arm, just say, is it better? Is it better? And is it better? And finally he cries, it's my leg! And of course everybody laughed, but you have to know where it hurts to know what to treat, don't you? Pain's important. We probably ought to thank God more for pain than we do. I'll admit that's not been on my list, but maybe we should. And it definitely proves that there is a God, because those pain receptors protect our body as well. What about this? 35 million gland cells in the stomach aid in digestion. Some of ours do a really, really good job at that. Maybe overly good because we overeat. But anyway, the kidneys filter the blood. That's how you get rid of the poisons that are in the system. There are 639 muscles of the body that work cooperatively, moving the joints more than, listen to this, 25 million times over the span of a lifetime. That's just almost beyond my imagination, but there it is again. A designer had to put that together. A man has the capacity to speak and understand multiplied thousands of words in thousands of languages. I just can't understand the people I talk to in the customer service department. Other than that, I'm good. But the human being has this capacity for understanding languages, and furthermore for speaking these various languages. So all these things to me demonstrate clearly that there is a designer, and that's the key to it. This didn't all just happen. It didn't just come about by accident. It's kind of like, we used to talk about how you can't put all the pieces to a watch into a box and shake the box until the watch goes together. It doesn't work that way. Somebody's got to carefully, put each piece in place. It is evident in our world that God put everything together. Okay, the next argument, that's the teleological argument, or as I said, the argument from design. The next one is the cosmological argument. And I was talking to Chris the other day, and I said, this might be where you need to step in. It is a great argument if you can ever get your mind wrapped around it. I probably understand it better today than I did even Sunday, because I did a lot of reading on it this week to try to absorb this. But what it says is, first of all, that the cosmos, that's everything, including the world, exists. Now, only the strangest of philosophies believe that we live in a world that doesn't really exist and that we don't really live. And I said strange. You read what they write, and if you think you're lost on this argument, you sure will be lost on theirs. But we all know it. This world's here, right? It exists. We've got that much we understand. So the first law of thermodynamics basically says nothing comes from nothing. Now think about that. It doesn't just happen. If you want to make something, what do you need? You need raw materials, don't you, in order to make that thing. All right? So therefore, there is a prime cause that is behind the cosmos. Look with me, if you will, to Hebrews chapter 3, verse 4, where the writer to those Hebrew brethren is talking. Listen to what he has to say there. For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. And again, the world exists, so somebody built it. The Hebrew writer says God did. Another place to look is Psalm 102. It refers to a similar type of idea. Psalm 102, we're going to look at verses 25 through 27. When we get over there. All right. Of old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure. Yes, they will all grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You will change them, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end. So again, there has to be a cause behind everything. That's the point of the cosmological argument, that there's a cause back there. You want to drive a person who believes in evolution to the wall, just keep saying, well, where did that come from? That's always your question. Where'd that come from? Where'd that come from? And if you read the really, really honest evolutionists, they'll admit that when it gets back to this point, to the beginning, they don't know. They used to say Big Bang. They've now, basically, the best ones are giving that up. Because, it's kind of like, well, where'd the bang come from? How'd that come to be? And you just keep pushing them back until finally they acknowledge that they don't know. They don't have a source for all of these things. I'm reminded of the story that's told. It obviously is make-believe of these scientists that believe they had figured out how to make life. And they went to God and said, we've figured it out. We know how to make life. And he said, well, really? And they said, yeah, come on, we'll show you. And they picked up 3 buckets of dirt and started out the door, and God said, no, bring your own dirt. And that's the point, isn't it? Where did the dirt come from? Where did just keep going. Where did it come from? Where did it come from? Where did it come from? Finally, you're going to have to admit that we don't know. That the only way we can know about the beginning is by faith. That's true of the evolutionists. They don't like to tell you that. There's nothing scientific about evolution, because true science posits a theory and then uses experimentation and evidence to either prove or disprove the theory. Well, they can't do that. And neither can I, by the way. We can't go back and have a new beginning. We're not able to do that. And so really, any discussion about how the world began is futile. They say, well, life came from the primordial, sludge. Well, where did the primordial sludge come from? See, it's always the same. Where did it come from? Where did it come from? Drive them back and make them answer that question. We need to teach our young people this. It'll frustrate professors if they're honest. It'll frustrate them because they don't have an answer for it. What about the second law of thermodynamics? Really, it denies evolution as well, because this law is sometimes called entropy, and it says things go from order to disorder. a winding down process. Now, if you don't believe that, ask Teresa about when she straightens the kitchen table out, what happens to the kitchen table? It goes from order to disorder. Because I get there and I start piling things up and moving things around. That's that. But the reality is it works that way everywhere, doesn't it? My body was much more functional 40 years ago than it is today. What about yours? I used to have 20/15 vision. Now, I take my glasses off and I can't read. Well, or it has to be really big, let's put it that way, for me to read. What's going on? What's going from order to disorder? It's winding down. Entropy is going on. Well, if that's the case, then how do you go? What they want to do is start with a sludge, primordial sludge, and they want that to grow until it becomes a human being. See, that's not order to disorder, that's disorder to order. And there's only one way to do that, God. He's the only one that can achieve that. Such an obvious process lets us know the universe is not eternal. And by the way, the scientists will admit that. Matter is not eternal. They'll admit that point. And so something had to be behind the existence of the universe. That's God. You have to have a prime cause. God's the prime cause. You can't go any further back than God. What about man's moral nature? And I'm going to tell you something about man's moral nature, what you're going to discover about this. It is talked about less when there's not war. Humanism, and we're not talking about humanity. Don't go into that, or being a humanitarian. That's not what we're talking about. Humanism, atheistic humanism, thrives when there's no war. When there's war, it dies. Because humanism takes the position that man is God. And you just think about that for a minute. The man makes all the decisions. Man causes it all to happen. Okay. When you start taking that position and a guy like Adolf Hitler comes along, how do you respond to that? How do you deal with that? See, so humanism dies in times of war and it rises again afterwards. You track its history, you'll see it rise and fall just that way as it goes along. Man's innate sense of right tells people Adolf Hitler's attempt to destroy the Jews was both deplorable and wrong. And right now, we're going through this again. They're already starting at The Hague right now to talk about what the Russian army has done in Ukraine. And I'm going to say this, I don't talk about this very often, brethren, we have a lot of brothers and sisters in Ukraine. And they are hurting. I mean, they're desperately hurting right now. And we need to add them to our prayers. You know, sometimes I think I've got it rough. We don't know what rough is. You know, some of them have been trapped inside. They're trying to starve them to death in some places. And if that doesn't work, they'll just kill them. And they've done that as well. So just... Yeah, that's more in Russia than is Ukraine, thankfully. Ukraine is really, we got a lot of good brethren there. Okay. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just telling you, I talked to too many people in Ukraine. Indirectly, granted, but we're going to let it go. Okay. Documentaries, though. Think about this. What's the difference between man and the beast? Does a beast conscience hurt it when it kills another beast? You know, I'm fascinated by animals. My two favorite animals are the tiger and the elephant. They don't seem to go together at all, but they are my two favorites. Have you ever watched a tiger on the prowl or a lion on the prowl? What do? You know, they prey on the weakest one, and they don't feel guilty because they did it. They kill the weakest. They kill the weakest A lion will kill the weakest elephant if it can get the elephant separated from the herd. The herd will protect it. But if it ever gets separated, then it's a goner. And the lion doesn't seem upset at all that it killed it. Well, why? Well, it doesn't have a sense of oughtness. See, why does your conscience hurt you? Because you've got a sense of oughtness. And I do too. And sometimes we know what we ought to do, but we don't do it. Paul's famous series of lines in Romans chapter 7 is powerful. Where he goes through and says, what I would do, that I don't do, and what I would not do, that I do. Well, that pretty much captures most of us, doesn't it? But you see, you've got to have some kind of a sense of oughtness in order for that to be the case. So Thompson and Jackson in their book said, if one does not acknowledge an eternal mind with which intrinsic goodness is coexistent, how is morality explained? See, they've tried to explain it by saying, well, it's just formed by the society. Here's the problem. Some things are universally rejected. See, people the world over are appalled by what Hitler did. It doesn't really matter what nation they came from. They're appalled by it. I think many, more and more people are becoming appalled by what's going on right now in Ukraine. Because everybody has a sense, that's not right. Well, what makes it not right? If you function in a world where you're talking about evolution and things like that, then might makes right. It's basically how the animals work, when you think about it. But not humans. We don't work that way. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. They have no conscience. Yeah. Yes. She just described how some serial killers don't have a conscience. They're sociopaths is what they are, and that's a rare breed. Thankfully, there aren't many of them around, that we have to deal with. Okay, I don't know of any technical term for what I'm about to talk about, but I want to talk about man looks up. Man looks up. Augustine, who lived back in the 300s, I believe. Augustine believed man's universal desire to worship, which he called intuition, was clear evidence there is a God. In an age of skepticism and doubt, did you know man still seeks to worship something? Our children, when they were back years ago, both of them wanted to go into Taekwondo. Their Taekwondo teacher was into Native American worship, but every time that we were with him on a Sunday, and I'm not talking about when the brethren met. I didn't miss a single service. Our children didn't either. But if it was in the afternoon, we went. Every time he would invoke the blessings of the Great Spirit. See, doesn't believe in the God of heaven per se, but he believes in the Great Spirit. So he's got to worship something. People in the New Age movement believe in karma and soulmates. Ancient Indians worship the Great Spirit. I already talked about that. The men of Athens had an idol, well, really to every god you could think of. Every god any man had ever worshipped, they had an idol for it. So much so that it's said that Athens in the days of Paul had 30,000 idols and only 10,000 people. So there were 3 idols for every person in town. And the authorities in Athens made a law. You can't introduce any more gods. Well, of course, Paul didn't violate the law. He found the idol that was dedicated to the unknown God, and he said, the one that you worship in ignorance, I'm going to tell you about him. And he began to explain it. But you see, man worships something. You might say, well, they don't worship something in our... Oh, yes, they do. Again, humanism worships man. You study their philosophy, and I have. I read all the early manifestos. They keep writing them, so I probably have not read all of them. But every time you read one, what you're going to find is they worship man. They believe man is God, and they bow down at the altar of man. But some people don't do that. They bow down at the altar of the dollar or gold or whatever it is. Things. There's some people that have effectively erected an altar in their house to electronic things. They have every new gadget that comes down the line. And that's what they worship. Batsell Barrett Baxter, in his book, I Believe Because, and though that's an older book, it's still very valuable to read, described a first-time visitor to Washington, D.C., seeing the 550-foot Washington Monument, who instinctively does what? If you walk up to the base of that monument, you look up till you see the top, don't you? That's what we all do. I know in mountain climbing, back when I was much younger, we were always looking up to the peak. And what was always frustrating about the really big mountains is every time you got to a peak, there was another one higher. you kept going, until you finally got above the tree line, and hopefully sooner or later you bumped into a top up there. But he says instinctively they look up. The same type of thing is with man. We look around us on the earth, and everything we see causes us to go, what made this happen? And we look up, to find something. Baxter also went on to describe the ontological argument. I'm going to do my best just to explain it. I'm not even going to tell you that I fully grasp it myself. I'm not sure that I do, but here it is. It's a branch of philosophy devoted to the nature or existence of God. Anselm began with a definition. God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. Then he argued that man is able to conceive in his mind of the idea that than which there is no greater. In other words, we can conceive of the possibility of God. That's all he's saying there. At least that's the way I take it. Anselm went on to say he could think of something even greater than that, than which nothing greater can be conceived. And he said it is the existence of that being greater than anything which man could conceive. We're going to talk more about God next week. And as we do so, I'm going to be honest with you today. There are going to be questions you can ask, and I'm going to say, I don't know. I don't have a complete answer for that. God is beyond my ability to conceive. And that's what Anselm's argument is. So Baxter went on to point out that Psalm 14:1 says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Now watch what Baxter says, because it fits Anselm's arguments. He says, in order for the fool to say God, he had to have a concept of God in his mind. To start out to deny God is a kind of implication that God exists. Isn't that interesting to think about that very idea? But just to say the word God, I don't believe in God. Well, you've already begun to discuss God. Despite yourself, you've begun to discuss God. So these are some of the reasons. Probably I'll tell you, if I was teaching my children why we believe in God, I'd probably use the design argument and the cosmological argument, the cause argument. Those are the two easiest to get your hands, wrap your mind around. By the way, the cause argument is most destructive to the atheistic concept because they'll reason their way around design, but they can't figure out how do you get past this point. Where did that come from? Where did that come from? Just keep driving them back. We talked about that. God is, that's where it came from. All right, thank you.